If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. This is part 2 of a 3-part interview with Dr. Margaret Manoogian, a professor of Gerontology, Aging, and Older Adulthood at Western Oregon University. In this episode, we discuss the role of community structure and policies in overcoming the limitations that intergenerational transformation has on one's ability to age well.
So, in your opinion, what role does our community structure and policies have on overcoming the limitations that intergenerational transmission may have on one's ability to age well?
Well, I think that probably the biggest influence on aging and aging well is socioeconomic status. It's financial resources. Having access to good healthcare, having access to healthcare practitioners that respect you, that you're visible, you're treated well. You can tell politically that I'm very strong in support of healthcare support for everybody. It's bottom line. Money should not dictate whether our children are taken care of. And those children that aren't taken care of young, that shows up all across the life course, right? So policies that support age-friendly communities. And what I mean by that is, first, addressing kind of healthcare and socioeconomic pieces, but also communities that support social engagement, easy access for all ages. Because what's good for an older adult, like being able to walk across the street in safety, is good for a young person, is good for a child. Having good access to social resources and opportunities for interactions amongst the generations and not segregation, I think is really important. I was, again, I'm going on a tangent. I warned you to.
Okay.
So when I was in my late 50s, I decided to walk the Camino de Santiago. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with that, but it's a walk across the south of Spain, and it was 500 miles. And I did it in 30 some odd days. And every day you get up, you put your grungy clothes on, you get out and you walk, and you have a cup of coffee and you walk, and you eat and you walk, and you duck into some amazing small communities and churches and stuff, and everybody's interacting. And during that time, I did that because I knew that I was heading into this next chapter, and I wanted to know what was important to me. So I decided that I didn't want to live in my house anymore, that I needed to move communities on that walk. And what did I want in that community? I wanted an age-friendly community where I could age in place. And so any policy that would support me aging in my home would be important. I wanted to be able to live frugally, but be able to have good food, good access to things, good library. And so I made the decision to sell my house, and I built a much smaller house in a community that's based on sustainability, and it's multi-generational. So there are lots of parents with young children that I can interact with, as well as people older than me. My 2 neighbor down, she's 84, and we have a lovely relationship. So it's very intentional. So to get back to your question, Corbin, is I think we need policies that support people aging in place, for sure, in safe and I would want to suggest communities where you can still maintain a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning and a sense of engagement. We need to support people in the basics. We've got way too many people that are unhoused and on the intersection of aging and being unhoused with the increasing risk of comorbidities, different things going on. Seeing someone with Parkinson's and a walker who's unhoused, that is just, to me, unacceptable, right? So, or even, in the, in the early stages of dementia, for instance, or even advanced stages of dementia, you see it all the time. So here in Salem, since I moved to Salem from Corvallis, I was appointed to the Mayor's Commission to advise Center 50 Plus. And one of the projects they're working on with a developer is what we call the Golden Girls Project. And it's a co-housing unit that will house, I think, 6 women. I'm not sure if they're just focusing on women, but we call it Golden Girls, where it'll be a co-housing situation. They'll have some common areas, but they'll also have their own space with bathrooms, and a little sitting area, and then they'll have these common areas, and they have to contribute to the community. And this is particularly targeted for low income women, because women are most at risk at the end of life because they outlive typically men, and they did not have opportunities earlier in life to make the same salary and have the same opportunities, especially these older cohorts. It's not so much true now, I think, but we'll see what happens. The other thing that might surprise you, that I think is a huge policy issue, and one that was just recently weighed on by the Supreme Court, is college debt. And I tell my students that I think one of the biggest gerontological issues that we are going to be facing is continually increasing the debt load of our young adults, because that's going to restrict options later in life, right? So I see my students $40,000-$50,000 in debt. I know people that are $300,000 in debt, and you don't have many choices when you owe that much money. So those are just, I could go on. There's a lot of policy issues. So supporting aging in place is really, really important. But age-friendly communities, looking at our structure in terms of healthcare and financial support for folks, and working with kids, working with families early, because that's going to impact later life.
Well, I think what's really cool about this is just with one question, it kind of intertwined everything else. And it's not just one answer, it's an entire web of answers. And
exactly.
Each thing is intertwined and connected. And yeah, so no, I appreciate all your feedback that you're giving us. I don't think it's a tangent at all. I think you're addressing some issues that, this thing is actually affecting this other thing, which in return is going to affect this overall subject. So,
right. Well, and, when you talk about health and well-being in that fourth age, and you think about it just across the life course, we need to move our bodies. That's a given, right? To keep moving. We need to eat well, and have access to good food sources. Mm-hmm. Folks that are, I know this from studying low-income families for years. The things with the longest shelf life are the least nutritious to eat, right? And so when I talk to a young child outside of a food line at a food pantry, I worked at a lot of food pantries, and she says, what are you looking forward to when you get in there? Fruits and vegetables. Well, those aren't typically the things you see in a food pantry, right? Those aren't they're not getting the nutritious things that they need. They're getting the canned or the boxed, macaroni and cheese or whatever. So nutrition, moving your body. But some of the other things that we have to think about are what we call in gerontology those third places. And third places are where you hang out. Like for some people, so many of us go to work. That's a place that we spend a lot of time. We have our homes, many of us. Not everybody has the luxury of having a home, but our home community, our family, that might be a second place. But a third place is where else do we congregate? And for some people, it's churches, for instance. Although Oregon is one of the most unchurched states in the nation, right? But when you look in a church, typically many of them are older adults, right? And it's a sense of support. Or it might be the local bar, or it might be the gym, or it might be the senior center, or it might be the bicycle group that goes biking around town. I don't know where that is. All different people have different locations. COVID really messed that up. Okay. So So having a sense of connection, and spirituality is part of that. I'm not talking organized religion, but that's another piece of well-being in aging. Having a sense of purpose, it's really important, no matter what age. And that purpose is not, I'm going to go off and be the next neuroscience researcher looking at these issues. It's like, what's my purpose in getting out of bed in the morning? What is it that is important to me today? Where I live, there are 2 glass greenhouses that were built in the 1940s. And I have half a raised bed. Gardening's really important to me. I have half a raised bed there inside the greenhouse where plants are on steroids. And then I've got some plants in my reduced yard here in my home. But when I go to that greenhouse, I see a ton of people from the community. They're hanging out there, right? They're on the picnic table outside. I helped write an ARP community grant that allowed us to make it accessible in the front with concrete. I basically wrote a grant for concrete, but yeah. So having a sense of purpose, it could be just working on your garden bed and sharing your produce with somebody else, right? And then the other pieces that are really important. So moving your body, eating well, having a purpose, spirituality can be part of that. But the other really 2 very, very important things is having strong social support. And where can we engage that? And how can we have that? And then the last thing that I think is really critical is enhancing our family relationships. 70%, somewhere around there, we depend on informal care as we get older as caregivers. So typically it's your spouse or your partner, but if they're not able to do it, usually it's an adult child, typically an adult daughter-in-law. We still see a lot of gendered lines of who provides intimate care. Men can be intimate caregivers, and I have plenty of examples of that, but typically it falls on women because of the way that we construct gendered expectations of what we do in families. But if you have a problematic relationship with your adult child, it's not going to work. And one of my students a couple of years ago did a presentation on, he himself was from Mexico, and he did a presentation on older Latinx individuals here in the United States and aging. And he said, you want to know what the long-term care insurance looks like for this population? It's called children. And the expectation is there that you will never go into a long-term care setting. Well, partly it's exorbitantly expensive, so only those that can afford it or have the, access to social insurance are able to get a bed in the first place. And then the cultural expectation is you care for them in your home. Well, if you have a lousy relationship with your adult child, how's that going to work? And so I think about that a lot. But those are the kind of key ingredients that I see in terms of what supports individuals in that latter end of life. So there are some benefits to getting to that place. And that is, we do know that wisdom, it's been documented in research that wisdom increases in later ages. And part of that is accumulation of experience. But I also know from a research that was done out of USC that looking at intergenerationally, that older adults give their adult children lots of advice, and advice also from the adult children to the older adults. The older parent happens. The adult child is least likely to pay attention to that advice, but the older adult is more likely to pay attention to the advice. So there's some interesting dynamics that happen in the context of that relationship as well, even when that older adult has a lot of wisdom, believe me. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on aging. And you can see, I think, really holistically about aging. And that's the nature of gerontology. It's very interdisciplinary.
I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging. Yeah, and I think, gerontology, we have that tendency to, because of the name describing it, to focus almost purely on the age end, the end of it, as opposed to the whole process throughout it. And, one of the things that I like to discuss with my students is, the concept of universal health care versus universal health. And that if we really want to fix these problems, it's a matter of people having a universal right to health. And how do we approach that? And that has to start at the front end and prepare people for, those latter stages where now they need more health care because of circumstances outside of their control and outside of our societal control. And I heard a lot of that in what you just talked about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'll give you a really good example. Why are we seeing such high rates of type 2 diabetes in younger and younger children? We've got lots of individuals in neighborhoods where I grew up. Now, I come from a really strong family of athletes on both sides. My uncle was an All-American football player, and Pop Warner was his coach. And when he played for San Jose State. And my cousin was an Olympic bound swimmer. And I've got on my German side, Ziggy, my first cousin, was the head coach of the Seattle Sounders and the LA Galaxy and was all about soccer, which is what the Germans are all about, soccer. I am generalizing. But anyway, so I have a lot. And I grew up on a street where I could just roam. And we were out till late at night. There was a Catholic family with 6 boys. I chased them around. I was the youngest of 5 of them. And I chased them around all the time. Got called in by a whistle, but with my mom with her fingers, right? I was always active. And I was safe. And a lot of these children are kept inside. We're not I ask my students about, there was a free after school rec program when I grew up. Did not cost money. I ran on one of the first AAU girls track teams in the Bay Area. I grew up in San Francisco Bay Area. And it didn't cost me hardly anything, right? But now to do athletics, you're encouraged to be a one sport person, and it costs so much money if you want to do well. And that's prohibits so many other kids from doing what they might want to do, right? Because families can't do it. So, I experienced that because my daughter's 6 foot and was a good basketball player. She's tall, quick, and coordinated. And they wanted her in Columbus, Ohio to train for a team. And as a single parent, I was like, I can't do this. I can't get you there. I don't know if I can afford it as a professor. I'm not making a ton of money. And I owned a house and I had another older child and it didn't work. And I felt kind of guilty about that. So I think about that a lot. And so I don't know. Health should be supported, and it's all across the life course. And we know, and I know you know this, Jeff, that if you were active younger in physical activities, you're more likely to be active later, right?
Yep.
There is that tendency to continue with your activity level. And that we need to teach as if I can never carry the backpack that I used to carry when I would backpack in the high Sierras. I can't carry that much weight on my back anymore, but I still get a lot of joy from hiking with my little knapsack in the woods.
Yeah.
So how do I adapt? How do I continue to do those physical activities over time? But if it's not encouraged young, and parents don't feel safe having their kids riding their bikes wherever, or climbing trees, or hanging out with the community tribe, or if neighborhoods don't offer that, and it's very discouraging. And I know that kind of stuff impacts later life.
And then you get into all the other aspects of, poorer children and the quality of the food that they have access to, right, and the negative impacts of that. I get so frustrated sometimes when I see really well-meaning groups trying to help people in poverty, and you see them, they're giving out boxes of food, but right on top of that box of food is a big loaf of white bread. I'm like, really? I mean, we can't give better quality food to our most needy people. I mean, there's got to be ways that we can kind of fix the system so that people are going to have access to the stuff that's going to make them healthy. And I agree wholeheartedly with you with the whole sports club kind of scene and what that's doing for athletics and for physical activity. And I was thinking when earlier on in the conversation, when you mentioned about when you were 4 years old, your mother allowed you to go across the street to, interact with a neighbor. It's like, you don't see that anymore. A 4-year-old going out on their own. Oh my goodness, what a horrible mother you must have had. It's like, that was our youth. I mean, our parents, get out of the house. We don't want you here until it's time for dinner. And we usually ignored those calls home. I mean, how many times did she have to whistle before you would actually come home?
Yeah. A couple of times. And every neighbor had a different sound. So all my peers knew, all the people I was with knew, that's your mom. You need to go home.
Yeah.
But yeah, at 6, I was riding my bike 4 blocks to the public library by myself.
Oh, you had horrible parents. I can't believe they let you do that.
I know.
Yeah,
So,
I grew up in a community where, we could easily walk to everything. We had a big park nearby. Everything was within walking distance.
yeah, I did too.
Youth sports were contained within the community. And I just felt it had a much, much better preparation for life in general. I mean, very few of us ever went on to college sports or certainly not professional sports. Although we did have one kid that I went to high school with, who's a year behind me or something, was the only kind of native born student who was on the kind of founding soccer team at my high school. Because when I was a senior in high school, soccer was just something we did in a PE segment.
Right.
We had a number of kids came in. There were 2 brothers that were from Italy. We had at least a half a dozen or more kids that had emigrated from Vietnam. And then we had 2 other guys, but one of them ended up playing goalie for Cleveland's soccer team when it first formed. And so we had some raw talent there, but it wouldn't be there if it wasn't for this influx of, the kind of desire to play soccer when most of us were playing football.
Well, in soccer I used to talk to my cousin about this. He sadly died a few years back, but you can get an old ball, you can tape something with tape and put up and just go out in the street and play. And so soccer is equalizer, right? In some ways, but if you're here in the United States, if you want to go further into soccer, you do have to start doing some of these pathways, right? To get you in. And so, but in terms of just general exercise, kicking a ball and running up and down the street is good exercise, right?
Yeah.
So, and anyone can do it, no matter how poor or how rich, right? You can go out there and kick the ball around. So,
well, I think if more parents would take a stand and say, no, we're not going to buy into this, because how much are these parents investing in their kid getting all this training and coaching to get a college scholarship when you could have put that money aside for college and it'd be paid for anyhow, scholarship or no? Mm-hmm. And just let the kids play and let them develop their athleticism, make it more of a community thing, and they're still going to get better. And the athleticism is there when they get to college or the next level. A good coach is going to be able to develop that further. Mm-hmm. And it's just this mentality that we have to have all of this specialized training. And if you don't get into the right soccer club when you're 5, you're not going to make it to the major leagues. And it's like, that's crazy.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think if you want to take this to the gerontological piece, this group of aging adults has been one of the most active groups, right? In terms of, there's lots of knee replacements going on, a lot of hip replacements going on, a lot of runners that ran for years and years and now realizing, I don't know if all that running was really good for my joints, but we're living longer. So chances are we're going to live longer with some issues happening, for instance, to our joints. Arthritis is pretty common. But when you go to a gym, and I belong to the local Y, I believe strongly in the mission of the Y, and I like that I see younger folks and older folks taking advantage of things. this older group wants to stay active longer. But they have to figure out how to do that, how to meander and do that with potentially some disability, right? And so having ways that we can stay active in an inexpensive way, right? Because a lot of these older adults are on fixed incomes. Some of the best, our healthiest older adults are those that integrate physical activity into their everyday lives. So they're walking to the store, they're gardening, maybe they grew up on a farm and still live on a farm and are still doing those kinds of activities that have integrated it into their daily lives. But we have to also be realistic in these older ages that we won't be doing. When I walked the track at Western, so I was a hurdler, and I coached hurdles for years. And when I walk by a hurdle, I can't tell you how hard it is for me to not to want to jump that hurdle. There is no way in heck I could jump that hurdle at my age, and I would probably hurt myself very badly. But I so desperately want to. And my daughter, when she walks with me, she's 29. She just quit her job and took a new one up in Portland. She's a school teacher. She was at Central High School. She'd walk with me. I was her coach, because she also hurdled. She'll take a hurdle and I'll say, "Oh, be careful. You're not 14 anymore." And
I don't know. That sounds a little ageist to me.
I'm just like, she takes them,
Yeah.
That's like, it's interesting how I've like, okay, I can't do that anymore, but I can go to a hurdle and I can still bring my trail leg over and try to see how kind of hip flexibility I have. And I get a little bit of that feeling of what it felt like to run track.
So my hope is to encourage people to not get to that point in life where they say they can't. It might be, I'm not going to improve as much, but I want to be able to keep maintaining it. And I was never a hurdler, so I don't know if I'd make it over hurdle 20, 30 years ago even. But, I'm still like coaching strength and conditioning for the wrestling team at Westland High School. And, I like to periodically just like bend down and squat, or deadlift 400 pounds. And, how the kid's like, "Oh my God, you can do that." And yeah, I'm 60 years old. And I can still do it because I keep doing it. Right. I'm a little worried. My son who just graduated, he's a wrestler. Well, he's done with wrestling now, but he wants to wrestle me. He thinks he could take me down, and I'm insistent that he can't. And I'm starting to feel like now at this point, I mean, I've delayed this long enough. I think we're at that cusp now where he's gonna beat me for sure. But how hard am I going to get in that process? But I keep telling him I'll go in the wrestling room with him. So I might be in a body cast next Tuesday. We'll see.
With that attitude, you will.
I said I might. I'm not going to let it happen.
Well, you actually touched on something that's really important. And Corbin, your comment is that there's plenty of data out there that if people have, depending on what your own view of aging is, that's going to affect your aging process. So if you feel negatively about growing older, chances are that's going to influence how you feel about it, right? And so if you see it as, in simple terms, if you see it as all these deficits, which a lot of people do, see it as a lot of deficits, and then chances are you're not going to age well, right? But if you see it as what you're saying, Jeff, like I'm going to do this as long as I can, or what I'm saying is I can't carry that backpack for a week-long backpack trip up in the high Sierras, but what are some ways that I can still get out into wilderness in a ways that, I can go on a Sierra Club trip and have them pack in my pack, or, on the Camino, rather than carry my pack the whole way, I can send it ahead. Right. And then just carry a knapsack and walk. That a lot of people do that on the Camino. So it's like, what can you do? How can you adapt? I hate to swim. I absolutely hate it. When I was a kid, I was a really fast runner and a horrible swimmer because I could not float. They put me in my exercise science head at Ohio University, put me in one of those bod pods. And when I came out, he said, "Margaret, you are really dense." And I said, "I am smart. Thank you very much." And then he looks at me and goes, "You don't float, do you?" And I go, "No, I've never been able to float. Scares the heck out of me." Right. But when I hurt my knee, the last time I ran, I miscalculated a curb and I landed on my knee. And that was the end of my running. And the the orthopedist said, you need to go rehab your kneecap and you need to go in the pool. I'm like, oh God, okay. And then I got bored and I had a flotation belt on, which was great because it kept me up. And then I got bored. So I got on my belly and I retaught myself how to breathe. And now I swim twice a week. I swim about half a mile. And the way that I got myself to do it, I had to fake myself out. I got those underwater buds so I could listen to a little music. And then the next thing I did was I swim 2 laps and I think about one family member. And the next 2 laps, I think about another one. The next 2 laps, I think about a good friend. The next 2 laps. So I think about different people across all the lengths that I'm doing. And that passes the time. And because it's boring.
Yeah, swimming is boring.
But I know it's good for us, right?
Yeah.
I know that not always doing this weight bearing stuff, and it uses different muscles. So, you kind of have to figure out what will work well for you and how you adapt as you get older.
Like that 2x4 metaphor, right, Dr. Armstrong?
Oh yeah, that's what I always tell my students. I said that to me, exercise is like the guy that's taking a 2x4 and smacking himself in the forehead. And you say, why are you doing that? Because it feels so good when I stop. I personally do not like exercise. And you think, okay, I've dedicated my life to exercise physiology and exercise science. I must be just loving exercise. And I hate it. I don't want to do it, but I know I have to, because if I want to age well, I got to do it. And the older I get now, the more I feel the need to do it, because it's like, I got to preach. I'm preaching to my students about aging and the importance of exercise. How can I not how can I let myself go? And, I just don't feel like exercise. I'm too old to exercise. But, you should be exercising if you want to age well. So,
Is this an interesting subject, though? The fact that you mentioned that you hate exercise, and Dr. Manoogian, you mentioned that the importance of starting kids young in sports. It's not just the physical aspect, it's the whole mental aspect as well. That discipline, that overcoming something that you don't want to do, that carries forward in life through any aging process, right? You do something at work, in your career, maybe you have to interact with a different personality, or there's a challenge in front of you. Well, what we do in the gym, or what we do in that training aspect, that mental mindset, that mentality of this sucks, but I'm going to overcome it. That also is going to play a role as well. And it kind of goes back to that whole web of everything's entangled and it's all intertwined.
Yeah. Well, and it's not so much the sports per se. It's just it's moving, it's doing stuff. I grew up on half an acre with my dad. They planted all fruit trees and gardens. And every day after he came home from work, my dad was an engineer. He would immediately change in his khakis and go outside. And he'd walk from tree to tree and he'd pick and he'd do whatever he was doing out there. He needed to be outside moving around. And it wasn't intentional, organized, nothing. It was basically just integrating and being outside. And, it was good physically and good mentally. You're right about that too. And there's also plenty of research that talks about well-being in natural places, right? So being out in nature and how important it can be for us. So yeah, it's interesting. And I would say too, something you just, I only did team sports because I was motivated. I didn't like to exercise either. In fact, my coaches used to get on me because I hated doing cross country. I was a sprinter. I was actually a pentathlete, which is when for girls they wouldn't let us do all the decathlon events eventually. So I did shot and I did high jump and long jump and turtles, and I was a sprinter. And being a long distance runner was boring, period. I did not want to do that. And so they would make me do the cross country season at the same time I was doing volleyball. This was in high school. And so I'd have to work out running, and it was usually distance work, obviously. And I would just be like, oh God, I just can't stand this. So at cross country meets, I would never get last, but I would usually get like towards the end because I was not interested in the sport. I knew it was to get me in shape for my regular track season. And I loved volleyball. That was one of my favorite things to do. So I think that, I think that the thing that motivated me was my team members. That helped me pass the time. So when I had to run those 3, 4, 5 miles, and on the weekends we do these really long runs, I had people to talk to, right? So for me, the only way to get me to exercise was with other people. And that's why swimming was never of interest to me. I couldn't float, and I couldn't talk to people. So that's a problem. But for older adults, again, we're talking about those third places. That I went to when I was rehabbing my knee, I went to a swim thing. There was a swim exercise in the pool, and this is in Corvallis. It was all older women that were in this class. And a lot of them put on their makeup and did their hair before they got in the pool because they never put their head in the water. And when I arrived, I was one of the younger ones. They're like, "Oh, who are you?" And they kind of took care of me, made sure I got all the equipment, got me in the pool. And I would watch them. Some of them were very, very, very active. And of course, there was a younger woman on the deck that was making them go through all kinds of exercises, myself included. And then there are other ones that were just kind of going through the pool, chit-chatting with each other. And at the end of my first session, this older woman said, "Margaret, I'm so glad you came and joined us. After we finish, we get dressed and then we have coffee together in the other part of the gym. This is at Timber Hill, so there's a space you can have coffee and stuff. And then we're there, and then we usually have lunch." I'm like, "Okay, y'all, you're all retired. I don't have that time. I have to go to work." But it was clear that that was a third place for them. That's where they not only got some exercise, which was really good for them, and it was low impact, and it was fun. They laughed a lot. The music was a lot of fun for them. They obviously knew each other really well. There were probably about 20 women in the pool together. And then they hung out together, right? They spent a large part of their day together. And then they went off and did their errands and such. And one woman confided in me that she was a caregiver for her first husband. And then her second husband, she was a caregiver for. And she pulled me aside. She said, "I should never have remarried because it really hurt on her."
Yeah.
So this class was her outlet to be with other women or other people, exercise, laugh, and relax a little bit. So those things are all important to think about as we get older, and what motivates us to stay engaged and active.
We pause this very interesting conversation with Dr. Manoogian. We'll continue in the next episode, in which we will discuss further how looking through the lens of intersectionality can help us to age well. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast, and until next time, keep aging well.